And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got? Policy and markets, elections, current events. The broadcast master tells us how to win. I said, policy and markets, elections and current events.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program once again. Indeed, as the great Biff Gore sings in our original theme song for this very program, we are making sense out of nonsense. Here again in partnership with the Washington Examiner, and it is such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you with also engaging, intelligent talk, Chang style. Great show today. We're going to talk in a little bit with Naomi Lim, political reporter at the Washington Examiner, about Joe Biden's selection yesterday of Kamala Harris, senator from California, to be his vice president. Announcement officially due later today, with the two of them presumably together in person. It will be one of those rare instances, I assume at least, where Joe Biden will come out of his basement. By the way, if you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel, please do, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. Also follow me on Twitter at Sang Center. That's Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter, just as you saw in that lower third. And also be sure to like me on Facebook, Jimmy Sengenberger Media Personality, facebook.com/Jimmy Sengenberger Pro, and check out jimmyatthecrossroads.com. Like, subscribe, follow, all those good things to our friends at the Washington Examiner, especially on this Washington Examiner Wednesday on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and of course at WashingtonExaminer.com. So as I said in a bit, especially because it is Washington Examiner Wednesday, we will get to one of the elite reporters at the Examiner in just a little bit to dive into the topic of Kamala Harris being selected as vice president by Joe Biden. But first, we are continuing to see troubling activity out of China, and that's putting it very mildly. What we have seen going on in Hong Kong now with arrests that will just make you pull your hair out of your head, with now sanctions upon American politicians and business leaders for, what was it here? Performing badly, and so much more, including now one of the senior intelligence officials of the United States saying, hey, we've got a concern about China interfering in America's election, hoping that Joe Biden might become president of the United States. What are we to make of it all? For answers and discussion, I am very pleased to welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads, Gordon G. Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China. Also, most recently, he's now the author of The Great U.S.-China Tech War and Losing South Korea. He's been published in numerous publications, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the National Interest, and many others, and is a Galen Institute Fellow, and he joins us now here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Gordon, welcome back, my friend. It's good to have you.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Jimmy.
Thanks for coming on. I mean, look, how would you describe the situation with China right now? Because I definitely think troubling is probably an understatement at this point, given everything that's going on.
Yeah, it's extremely dangerous what Beijing is doing because it's moving across the board against a range of countries and people, of course. So you have, for instance, in June, in a premeditated act, it killed 20 Indian soldiers. You have the end of autonomy in Hong Kong, and that is with the jailings that we have just witnessed, the arrest of Jimmy Lai, his 2 sons, and 4 executives of Apple Daily, the pro-democracy newspaper, and the troubling intercepts of the U.S. Navy in the global commons, a threat to dismember Japan, which Beijing made on August 2. So it's just going after everyone. And you got to wonder, why is China taking on the world? I mean, is this an act of strength? Is it an act of weakness? Whatever it is disrupting peace in not only just the region, but everywhere.
And so when it comes to Hong Kong, let's zero in there, because there had been this idea of one country, 2 systems that was supposed to last until, 2050 or so in terms of the relationship between Hong Kong and China, where Hong Kong would essentially be able to continue its autonomous or semi-largely autonomous state. China just decided in the past few months to scrap that, and now they've been arresting dissidents, they're arresting media figures, and many others. So in terms of Hong Kong specifically, what are we noticing is exactly happening, particularly in terms of the change in the way China is treating Hong Kong, that Americans must know about, Gordon?
Ended Hong Kong, which was promised until 2047 under the one country, 2 systems formula. This was a promise documented in a treaty with Britain, the Sino-British Joint Declaration of 1984. And on June 30, China enacted its national security law, which is draconian in the extreme. As people have said, this is the end of law in Hong Kong. And they've used it now to arrest a number of protesters, dissidents, and most famously, Jimmy Lai, the publisher of Apple Daily. They try to decapitate the paper. They basically, their position is, unless you are completely in love with China and completely submit yourself to it, you're probably violating the national security law just by breathing. And that really is, as people say, the end of any sort of autonomy in Hong Kong. This has important implications for the United States and for other countries, because Hong Kong is a global financial center, but probably won't retain that status because China is using coercion in a way that really makes it very difficult for international financial institutions to operate freely.
Yeah, so when we're talking about Hong Kong, one of the things that we have noticed is that people there are not just taking this sitting down or lying down. They have been out there protesting, making their voices heard, getting arrested, as we're talking about, particularly because I think that they have dealt with this perspective, come from this perspective of freedom, that they've been able to live their lives as they see fit. Hong Kong has been a financial capital of the world. In fact, a great many studies have identified Hong Kong as a leading free market area on the globe. And now that's being taken away. And they're like, we see what's happened in other parts of China when they have done this. We don't want it to happen here. Is that right?
Yes. Well, this is important because Taiwan, one country, 2 systems, which is supposed to apply in Hong Kong, was originally developed by Beijing for Taiwan. And Taiwan has always been the big prize for Beijing. Now, last year, Tsai Ing-wen, the president of Taiwan, she wasn't going to be even renominated by her own party for the election which occurred in January. She was so far behind. But when Beijing started to try to put the screws into Hong Kong with this extradition bill that it proposed, all of a sudden people in Taiwan remembered why they enjoyed their freedom, why everything was so important to them. And Tsai Ing-wen, she got the nomination of the Democratic Progressive Party to run for re-election, and she won in a landslide. which shows you that Beijing's policies are ham-fisted, but nonetheless, what's happening in Hong Kong is a lesson for the rest of the world. This is what Beijing will do. It will not honor its promises, and that means whether we're talking about trade or whether we're talking about climate change or whatever, Beijing does not honor its words.
Gordon G. Chang, our guest here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. And I do want to make one correction. It's the Gatestone Institute that you're a fellow at. I think I was combining that with a Star Trek institute, the Daystrom Institute, and combining a brand new institute that Gordon Chang is involved with. But that is not the case. So Gordon,
Jimmy,
yes, sir.
Jimmy, I would love to be at Starfleet Academy, so thank you very much.
Well, I was thinking the Daystrom Institute, but I do think a lot of people working there happen to have gone through the Starfleet Academy first. So I certainly appreciate that, Gordon G. Chang. By the way, I don't know if we have had you on the show before. Maybe we did in the early on where we had the show opening with the harmonica playing and all that fun with Biff Gore and the theme song. What do you think about that?
I saw that because we were on, and I didn't hear it because the video, the sound wasn't working. But it really is very, very attractive. So one day I'm going to have to see the with the sound.
I'm going to have to send you and your wonderful wife a link to that music video. I'd love your thoughts on that. But back to China and the serious issues at hand, Gordon G. Chang. When we're talking about Hong Kong, that's one key aspect of what we're seeing right now. We've seen the photos, we've seen the videos, we've seen the travesties that are going on there. But you mentioned Taiwan as being really the big prize. And a lot of people are growing increasingly concerned about Taiwan. In fact, I've seen reports that the U.S. military is considering options in case China, mainland China, were to attack Taiwan, which the United States hasn't actually recognized Taiwan as an independent country up to this point, right? How does that dynamic work, and what should Americans know about the situation vis-a-vis China and Taiwan?
Well, the People's Republic of China has never ruled Taiwan. In Beijing, they talk about reunification. People in Taiwan talk about unification because they look at this and they say, look, we've never been part of you. But Beijing believes that Taiwan is China's 34th province. People in Taiwan believe that they're a sovereign state. They're a free democratic society. And of course, the People's Republic of China is not. Taiwan is critically important to the United States for two reasons. First of all, for more than a century, we have drawn our Western defense perimeter off the coast of East Asia. And Taiwan is at the center of that perimeter, that crucial line. Is that sitting at the intersection of the South China and East China Seas. It prevents the Chinese Navy and Air Force from flooding into the Western Pacific and eventually into the Eastern Pacific. So to us, from a strategic point of view, it's just so important. Also, there's something even more significant, and that is Beijing has been attacking our democracy and even the concept of democracy, and it does so every day. We cannot allow China to absorb any free society, especially one as important as Taiwan. So I believe that we need to say in public, as well as in private, to Chinese leaders that we will defend Taiwan.
Let's talk about another aspect of all that we're seeing with China. They've sanctioned 11 different Americans, including Senators Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, Josh Hawley, Tom Cotton, Pat Toomey. They've performed badly, according to the Foreign Ministry spokesperson for China. How did this come about in terms of the Chinese saying, hey, we're going to sanction these U.S. officials and also some business executives? And does that really do more than sort of just send a message of disdain? Or is there some teeth for some of these individuals who may have investments in China? I don't know.
Yeah, last week, President Trump, pursuant to the new Hong Kong legislation, sanctioned 11 individuals for eroding Hong Kong's autonomy. And that included Carrie Lam, the chief executive of Hong Kong, the top political officer. So China this week decided retaliatory sanctions. What's significant is not only did they go after the senators and Chris Smith, the New Jersey Republican, who's a human rights advocate, they also sanctioned NGO leaders in the U.S. But what was significant, what was really important was they didn't sanction any Trump administration officials, which showed either caution on the part of the Beijing regime or the realization that they had really no cards to play. Our sanctions on China, on those 11 individuals, are really meaningful. It's not like they're going to go to the United States, but we are also sanctioning banks that have any financial dealings with those individuals. And that is where the bite is in our sanctions. China's sanctions have no bite at all. And matter of fact, the 6 legislators, they wear that with pride. You know, they're boasting about being sanctioned by China. So they did them a favor. So China right now is in this curious position of not really doing anything in terms that's effective.
Let's talk a little bit about the dynamics between the United States and China with your Gordon Chang, our guest here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. When we look at his relationship with President Xi, yesterday morning, I believe it was, there was an interview that Hugh Hewitt did, radio talk show host, with President Trump. And in cut 7, he's asked specifically about his changed relationship with Xi Jinping. I want to take a listen to this and get your reaction.
But you tweet nice things about President Xi. Is it possible to both be nice to people and also be tough as hell on them?
I had a very good relationship with President Xi. I would even say better than good. I would say we had a great relationship. He's a great gentleman, but my relationship is no longer very good with him because of what they did with the China virus. If you ask me that now, I would have said great. I had a great relationship with them. I made a great trade deal. They're buying billions and billions of dollars worth of product. You notice you don't hear the farmers complaining, do you? They just gave the largest corn order in history last week, the largest ever. You know why? Because he's smart. Because rather than saying we're not going to do business with them, they say, let's get the biggest orders we've ever gave, because they know how I feel.
So in terms of the relationship between President Trump and Xi Jinping, which started off seemingly pretty good, then he got into the trade war off and on. They were reaching little agreements here and there. Then they finally reached the phase 1 agreement the end of last year. And then coronavirus hits, and that's President Trump's statement or reasoning for why he says we no longer have a very good relationship. Do you think it's deteriorated much? How do you think they interact with one another now, especially given coronavirus, but also all the other things that we're seeing going on right now?
Well, Jimmy, it's certainly deteriorated. In 2017, first year of the Trump administration, President Trump did what every other American president has tried to do since Nixon, and that is to try to have a good relationship, a friendly relationship with Beijing, and to see if the Chinese will reciprocate. Well, Xi Jinping didn't reciprocate. And so that's why we had the friction in 2018 and why it's really degenerated into what we see today. But I think that's a good thing because we're being realistic about China. And President Trump, for the first time since the Eisenhower administration, is taking robust measures to protect the United States from malicious Chinese actions. So I view this as progress. Not everyone is going to view it in the same way, but we got to remember that China's challenge to the U.S. is existential, that they are engaging in all sorts of activities that they shouldn't be. We closed the Houston consulate as a signal, but Beijing appears to continue what is completely unacceptable to the United States.
Now, Gordon Chang, when we look at the dynamics between President Trump and President Xi, one of the things we cannot ignore is the election that's coming up on November 3rd. We're just a few months away from Election Day. Voting starts in a matter of weeks. And Ambassador Robert O'Brien, who is the National Security Advisor, has indicated that he believes and that intelligence is showing that China wants Joe Biden to be elected president of the United States. On the Hugh Hewitt show yesterday, President Trump was specifically asked about that here in Cut 8. Let's take a quick listen and get some reaction from you.
Ambassador O'Brien said China wants Vice President Biden to win. Why do you think that is?
Because they'll own the United States if he wins. And with me, they were having the worst year in 67 years because I tariffed the hell out of them. We took in billions and billions of dollars. I gave some of it to the farmers because they were targeted, and I put the rest in the Treasury of the United States. We've taken in tens of billions of dollars from China, and it was having a huge impact on China, negative impact on China.
You're still the best.
China will own, just like when his son walked out with $1.5 billion from China to manage, where he'll make millions of dollars a year. Look, China will own the United States if this election is lost by Donald Trump. If I don't win the election, China will own the United States. You're going to have to learn to speak Chinese.
I don't want to get you into a political discussion, Gordon Chang, but I'm just curious what you make of what Ambassador O'Brien has said and also what President Trump is claiming there, that China will own the United States if Joe Biden becomes president.
First of all, I do believe that Beijing does not want President Trump to be elected. China watchers have views that span that Beijing favors Biden or Beijing favors Trump. But when you look at the propaganda that Beijing has been issuing, and you look at some of the things that they've been doing under the surface, under the table, they point to their desire to unseat President Trump. And that's because Trump was right when he said to Hugh Hewitt, his actions were causing problems for Beijing. I think China's in a world of hurt right now for a number of reasons, but one of them is that President Trump has exacerbated a number of their economic and other problems. So Trump's right on that. As for whether Beijing will own the United States if Biden will be elected, I don't think they'll own us, but I do think we're going to lose time. As I mentioned, Biden is going to try to develop a cooperative relationship with China. He not only believes China is benign, but that we should do this. What's going to happen in a Biden presidency is you'll have a year of weak and humiliating policies, like we saw during the Obama administration with regard to China. And Xi Jinping, though, is not going to reciprocate. He's going to, I think, double down and become even worse. And so even Biden will have to pivot and have Trump-like policies, but we will have lost a critical year. So I don't agree with President Trump when he says the Chinese will own us. The Chinese are driving the changes in the relationship, not the United States. And Biden will have to do what any American president will do, that's defend the United States. And if he doesn't do it, he'll be driven from office.
What policy tools, in your opinion, Gordon Chang, are in President Trump's toolbox that he hasn't used yet that he should use, or maybe that he has used that he should press a little more?
The number one thing that I would do if I were advising the president would be, I think President Trump should use his powers under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977 to end all technical cooperation arrangements between U.S. companies and China. And specifically, the ones that come to mind would be Google's partnerships in China on artificial intelligence. These are fed, the products of this type of research is fed directly into the Chinese military. Google knows or should know that because Beijing has this policy, which is an announced policy, of civil-military fusion. And so we should not be helping the Chinese build a military which is being configured to kill Americans. Also, Microsoft has partnership arrangements which would be targeted, but I would end those. That's the first thing that I would do. But in general, I think what the United States needs to do is to reduce drastically, even cut off trade and investment between the two countries for a number of reasons.
And that, of course, is where we would disagree, but we're running out of time. Although I will say this, I said this last time we had a conversation, Gordon, and I believe it's true now, is that letting up at this moment on the tariffs would send a poor message to the Chinese that we should not be sending at this point in time. So while I would not exacerbate that, I would at least agree that we shouldn't roll that back. But one more question I have on the policy tools at President Trump's disposal at this moment before we let you go, Gordon, and that is when it comes to sanctions and sanctioning different Chinese officials. I mean, they just decided, hey, we're going to go ahead and sanction 11 Americans to retaliate for you sanctioning, 11 Chinese officials. Is that something that President Trump should leverage more, maybe particularly against financial institutions? That's something you and I have talked about, especially vis-a-vis North Korea. What should we be seeing from the president as far as sanctions are concerned?
I think that what we should, in the immediate weeks, should be making sure that none of those 11 sanctioned individuals are maintaining ties with financial institutions that deal in U.S. dollars. Because if they are, then we need to impose the steepest of fines or even cutting them off from their dollar accounts. Because we have to show Beijing that we're not afraid of them. And that's, I think, one of the major things that President Trump has done and deserves credit for. And that is saying to Beijing that they no longer have a veto over American foreign policy. Because in the George W. Bush and Obama administrations, Beijing was basically telling us what to do. And the response of Bush and Obama was, yes, sir. That was completely unacceptable. Of course, that's no longer the case. This is going to be a period of high tension, but it needs to be, because we've got to unwind some very unacceptable and some very disadvantageous American policies on China.
Always interesting insights from you, Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China, most recently, The Great U.S.-China Tech War with the Gatestone Institute, and also an aspiring Starfleet cadet. So if the officials at Starfleet Command are listening, you have someone who would be a perfect fit, particularly on your galactic political, because we don't have just geopolitical. It's got to be like with a galactic political, intergalactic, interpolitical, something like that studies or affairs. I think you'd be a great fit right there, especially for dealing with the Romulans.
Yeah, no, as I was going to say, after we deal with Chinese, it's on to the Borg and the Klingons.
Yeah, although you saw that Starfleet ultimately achieved peace with the Klingons, that while it did break up a couple of times, it was ratified again. They've been able to sort through things. I'm a little more concerned about the Romulans than the Klingons.
And the Borg.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, the Borg are always deeply concerning. They're the ones that want to, they're like China. They want to assimilate everybody across the galaxy, right?
Right. Actually, there's a lot of truth in that.
All right, Gordon G. Chang. We've known each other now 3 years. I've been interviewing you, and finally, we demonstrate now we have found our shared affinity for Star Trek. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Take care. Once again, Gordon Chang joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Kind of reminds me a little bit of that day we had the Star Wars discussion with Dave Rubin. He wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting. I was planning on bringing up Star Wars with Rubin. I wasn't expecting this with Gordon Chang. But, it doesn't surprise me, having gotten to know Gordon over the past few years, that he might be a Star Trek fan. But his insights, too, are very solid when it comes to the stakes of Taiwan and Hong Kong. Jimmy Lai, who is a noted media figure there, owns a couple of media outlets. His arrest, I think over the weekend, was deeply disturbing. The Uyghur Muslims, what they're doing, 3 million Muslims in concentration camps, literal concentration camps, not what the left describes as Trump concentration camps with regards to illegal immigrants, but actual concentration camps involving re-education camps. The list does go on with what China is doing. So we need to be smart about it. We do need to be tough on China. Where we get to the economics is where I think things get a little bit dicier, and you have to be a little more sensitive in that way. But it is important to take a tough stand, especially at this moment, and it does appear quite clear that Joe Biden would not take that level of a tough stand, especially in these crises and especially regarding coronavirus, as Donald Trump. Once again, my thanks to Gordon G. Chang for joining us here today on Jimmy at the Crossroads. We're going to take a break, and here in just a few moments on the program, we will talk with Naomi Lim, who is a reporter, political reporter at the Washington Examiner, and we will dive in on the topic of what's going on with regards to President Trump and his selection of Kamala Harris. It looks like we are frozen on the computer. Is that right, Mr. Matoush? Working the Matoush magic as producer extraordinaire. So we will have to return in just a moment. Stay tuned.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Hey, this is Frankie.
Hey, and I'm Angelo. We're the owners of F&A Pizzeria. If you're looking for the best pizza in town, remember us, F&A.
Hey, we got the best crust.
F&A.
We got the best cheese.
F&A.
We got the best sauce.
F&A, man.
Put it all together, what do you got?
F&A.
Yeah, you got that right. F&A.
F&A Pizza on the corner of Hell Yeah Avenue and Dan Straight Street.
Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics.
Are you all right with being a shark maverick? Was it okay to team up with you?
I'm good, man. It's a partnership. We're like this, Jimmy. I got you.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense.
Do you suffer from feelings of entitlement, self-righteousness, and arrogance? Fits of resentment, anger, and hypocrisy. Terror that the world is going to end, or even worse, that the world isn't going to end and that things are going to get better. A deep need to point fingers, deflect, or deny. Uncontrollable stress, frustration, or depression. Fear of recession, fear of no recession. Then you may have PTDS, or President Trump Derangement Syndrome. Fortunately, there's new Magatol, the proven cure for PTDS. Just one Magatol a day realigns your sensibilities by bypassing erratic brain signals to amplify the logic receptors. Talk to your Obamacare doctor today to see if Magatol is right for you. Recommended dose of reality is at least once daily. Warning snowflakes. Side effects of Magatol may include optimism, hope for the future, good feelings about your country, accepting economic prosperity, renewed faith in capitalism, and admitting that things aren't so bad under Trump. If you discover you are allergic to common sense, stop use immediately and contact your doctor. Relax. Breathe. It's Magatol, from the makers of Triggerol.
Hi, Jimmy. This is Bill Clinton calling your secret hotline here. I gotta keep it down because I'm calling from the doghouse here in Chappaqua, New York at our place. Don't even ask. All you need to know is she's on the warpath again. Oh, boy. Hillary yelled at me for listening to you. I have to do it in secret. But I really admire your show. I really do. I'm calling to wish you the best. All the best. In the future and even right now. Oh, here she comes. Listen, I got to go, but you got a great show, and you're going to do very well in the future, I'll tell you that much. Oh, my God, I know it's going to happen. She's going to have me read chapters of her book again. Put us both to sleep. I know what the title of her darn book should have been. Should have been called How I Dropped the Ball on the 2-Yard Line with 3 seconds left in the Super Bowl. I got to go.
And ladies and gentlemen, let's get you back to your host of the Crossroads, Jimmy Sengenberger, Sang Style himself.
Yes, indeed. Welcome back. Jimmy at the Crossroads. Jimmy Sengenberger bringing you engaging, intelligent talk in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Once again, thanks so much for joining us on this Wednesday, the 12th of August. My thanks to Gordon G. Chang for joining us and sharing his always fascinating insights on what's happening in China here on the show. By the way, if you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel, please do. YouTube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. Also, follow me on Twitter at Sang Center. That's Sang with an E, not an A. Center on Twitter, just as you see on the screen there. Plus, of course, like the Facebook page, Jimmy Sengenberger Media Personality, Facebook.com/Jimmy Sengenberger Pro, and JimmyAtTheCrossroads.com. We've got all the content shops, so much more right there at JimmyAtTheCrossroads.com. And of course, do not forget to follow, like, subscribe, all those good things to our friends and partners at the Washington Examiner on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and of course at WashingtonExaminer.com. The Examiner does have a magazine, by the way. You want to make sure to check that out. So it is Wednesday, and here on Jimmy at the Crossroads with yours truly, Jimmy Sengenberger, we always like to check in for Washington Examiner Wednesday with a reporter, commentator, somebody from our friends at the Examiner to talk about the hot-button issues of the day. And with yesterday's news that Joe Biden had decided to tap Kamala Harris, senator from California, to be his vice presidential running mate, it seemed like a no-brainer to talk about what we know now and where things may head as a result of Kamala Harris's win of the Veep stakes. To talk about this, I'm pleased to be joined now by political reporter at the Washington Examiner, Naomi Lim. Naomi, welcome to the show. It's good to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming on. We appreciate it, especially because this was a pretty big announcement. Now, I don't think it was surprising for many people. In fact, I would have been surprised if it wasn't Kamala Harris, senator from California. But what do we know so far, Naomi?
I think you're exactly right. I think it was a very conventional choice, but at the same time, it's historic. Obviously, if the Democratic ticket wins in November with the combination of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, she'll be not only the first female vice president, but the first female vice president of color. And so I think the political consideration for that moving forward is, whether that will drive voters to the polls to vote for the ticket as opposed to voting against President Trump and the incumbent.
Yeah. So in terms of this selection of Joe Biden picking Kamala Harris, as you said, it is in many ways a conventional choice. What does it bring to the table from the Biden standpoint?
I think some of the benefits and the pros that the senator from California brings is, one, she's youthful. She's sort of, 20 odd years younger than Biden. And I think that's really important for him, knowing that he'll be one of, the oldest president to take power if they do win. And I think that was really important in a consideration because leading up to that, he would always tell voters and reporters that, he wanted someone that could, take over him at a moment's notice. I think the other she brings is twofold. She helps with campaigning because we've seen how she can potentially be an attack dog on the campaign trail, even though she did that in the primary against Biden. And then I think if they're successful, she also brings governing experience. She would help, with the administration, working with members of Congress as being a first-time senator herself. And also she has that administration experience from she was Attorney General of California for 2 terms, and before that, San Francisco's district attorney, and then a line prosecutor at a local county before that. So I think that she brings this breadth of experience. Having said that, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but that also opens her up to criticism, not only from President Trump, but also Republicans up and down the ticket.
And from Democrats, too. In a moment, we'll get to I think some reasoning behind a lackluster response from some diehard left-wingers who are not too pleased with this pick because they don't think that she is far left enough. They think that she is wrong on criminal justice issues and so forth. But I want to go to a point about the debates, Naomi Lim, our guest from the Washington Examiner. During the debate situation earlier on in the campaign, they did have, Biden and Harris, some tussles, shall we say, against one another. And there was a particular blow that Kamala Harris, senator from California, landed on Joe Biden during the primary debates that is, I think, going to stick around throughout the campaign.
It's personal, and I was actually it was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of two United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. And it was not only that, but you also worked with them to oppose busing. And, you know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
To coddle the reputations of segregationists, of people who, if they had their way, I would literally not be standing here as a member of the United States Senate, is, I think, it's misinformed and it's wrong.
Should Joe Biden apologize for that?
He's going to have to make that decision. But, you know, let's be very clear that the senators that he is speaking of with such adoration are individuals who made and built their reputation on segregation.
Of course, she's talking about clips uncovered from, I think, the 1970s during the debates over busing as a way of integrating schools. Naomi Lim, while she might say, hey, that was during a campaign where we were going toe-to-toe on the debate stage and, you know, we were trying to win, that's a pretty big charge that she leveled. Either she was really hurt and struck by Biden's words at that moment, enough to make those comments and be very emotional about it, or she was sort of putting on a show and has moved on?
It is a really odd dynamic for them to now, you know, reconcile. I think it's funny too, because the Republicans yesterday, as soon as the senator was unveiled, put out a release from one of the spokespeople to point out that, you know, Kamala Harris never received that apology from Joe Biden. I do think that they are going to, that happened last June. It's been more than a year now since that happened. And we've seen sort of gradually as she's come onto the campaign trail, whether it be in fundraisers before the announcement, obviously, they were pointing out things like, it's just politics, it's a grudge. I mean, we don't hold on to grudges, things like that. And I think they're going to try and fold that more into the mainstream. But it is a rocky for them, just having to ask that. And I also think it's funny because I was listening back to that. And one of Biden's sort of responses to Kamala was, you know, he has a law degree too. And instead of becoming a prosecutor, he became a public defender. And I think it's funny that they've kind of previewed for the fall is going to look like, but that's the nature of primaries. And that's at least what Democratic strategists will say between now and like the next couple of months.
It is the nature of primaries, but at the same time, some of these moments are. They're not going to be ones that you'll be able to avoid seeing ads on and that sort of thing, which is going to be pretty striking as things unfold. But I want to go to one more debate moment, because this is something that people are saying is a way in which Mike Pence, during the vice presidential debate, may challenge Kamala Harris from California, and that is in Cut 5, Tulsi Gabbard, the congresswoman from Hawaii, when she was vying for president and went on the debate stage against Kamala Harris, she was very hard-hitting on criminal justice, and especially in light of President Trump's First Step Act, which was a criminal justice reform measure passed last year by Congress and signed into law on a bipartisan basis and signed into law by President Trump, may be a line of attack that the Trump campaign will want to level against Senator Harris, who wants to again become vice president of the United States. Now, let's take a listen to this.
I want to bring the conversation back to the broken criminal justice system that is disproportionately negatively impacting Black and brown people all across this country today. Now, Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And she fought to keep cash bail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Senator Harris, your response.
As the elected Attorney General of California, I did the work of significantly reforming the criminal justice system of a state of 40 million people, which became a national model for the work that needs to be done. And I am proud of that work. And I am proud of making a decision to not just give fancy speeches or be in a legislative body and give speeches on the floor, but actually doing the work of being in the position to use the power that I had to reform a system that is badly in need of reform. That is why.
So that's a little bit of the exchange that is pretty notable from Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii and Kamala Harris of California going against one another on criminal justice issues. Now, of course, one thing that is unique and historic about Senator Harris in this race is that she will be the first black woman ever nominated by a major party to be on a national ticket as president or, in this case, vice president of the United States. Yet at the same time, that doesn't mean that her criminal justice record is one that she's going to be able to campaign on easily in the year 2020, or so it may seem.
Yeah, and I think she's cognizant of that fact. She was cognizant of that during the primary and almost embarked on this sort of image rehabilitation. She released her memoir, I think it was called The Hard Truths, and it was about painting her as a progressive prosecutor. I think the problem for her is that she's criticized for things that she did do and things that she did. So it's a really hard needle for her to crack. I think the other really stark example is her anti-truancy policy, where she sort of was very forceful on parents of kids that didn't attend schools. And again, that disproportionately affect minority communities that she sort of says that she is an ardent defender of. I think, though, also is going to be in the Republicans' court, where they want to try and paint Democrats as being, not, the defunding the police and things like that, and that President Trump and the Republican Party is the party of law and order. So I think when they try and criticize her for her record, I think they're going to have to be cognizant of that as well.
Right. Yeah, that's why I would think that the Trump campaign will want to focus a little more, Naomi Lim, our guest from the Washington Examiner, on criminal justice reform as far as some of the things like what the First Step Act entails, and stay away from some of these other lines of attack that may undermine the law and order message that you're highlighting, to be sure. I want to go to one more clip here on Kamala Harris that shows, I think, what the Democrats are hoping for, and Republicans are also highlighting this. And this was her exchange, I think, last year during testimony by the ICE director, where he was talking, being pressed on the perception of ICE, and Senator Harris was pressing him on this notion to get across her point, which, of course, is something Democrats would like to see, this forcefulness in a debate against Vice President Pence. But at the same time, Republicans, again, pointing to this as an example of extremism on the part of Harris.
I do not see a parallel between what is constitutionally mandated as it relates to enforcing the law.
Are you aware that there's a perception?
I see no.
Are you aware that there's a perception
that puts ICE in the same category as the KKK? Is that what you're asking me?
No, I'm very specific about what I'm asking you. Are you aware of a perception that the way that the discretion
I see no parallel.
I'm not finished.
I see none.
I'm not finished. I'm not finished. Are you aware that there's a perception that ICE is administering its power in a way that is causing fear?
What do you make of the way that Republicans and Democrats will differentiate their perspective on a clip like that?
I think it's interesting because we saw President Trump respond to her selection yesterday. He sort of pointed out things like her issues on tax, her issues on Medicare for all, her stance against defunding the military. But he also brought up her sort of grilling of then Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, Justice Brett Kavanaugh, about how, that was an example of her being nasty. And I think that is a double-edged sword, because women in a vice presidents are technically supposed to be dogs, and I think we haven't had that many examples of female in that role. So how she can sort of balance this act between defending Joe Biden against a very sort of antagonistic president, as well as sort of not turning off voters by, stereotypes of what women politicians are going to be. So I think it's uncharted territory for both parties going forward, and I think that the debate will probably be the best sort of venue to go toe to toe. I think the other problem with Kamala Harris, if I was to take it from a Republican standpoint, is that she is really good in these set moment pieces. You saw her roll out her campaign launch with 20,000 people that all were sort of drawn to her. You saw her debate against Joe Biden. You saw her in those different Senate, hearings. I think the problem for her as a reporter that covered her from the very beginning is her consistency. She is really great at again, these key moments, these stage moments, but whether she can keep that up and that momentum up, doing retail politics, even though we don't really know what that looks like amid a pandemic, I think that will be the key to this.
Again, we're talking with Naomi Lim, political reporter at the Washington Examiner, here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Let's go to cut one. Since you mentioned President Trump and what he had to say yesterday in his first reaction to Senator Kamala Harris being selected by Joe Biden to be his vice presidential pick, here's what he had to say.
She wants to slash funds for our military at a level that nobody can even believe. She is against fracking. She's against petroleum products. I mean, how do you do that and go into Pennsylvania or Ohio or Oklahoma or the great state of Texas? She's against fracking. Fracking's a big deal. She's in favor of socialized medicine, where you're going to lose your doctors, you're going to lose your plans. She wants to take your health care plans away from 180 million Americans. 180 million Americans that are very happy with their health insurance, and she wants to take that away. So she was my number one pick. I mean, she was, as they would say, because hopefully you'll start college football, she was my number one draft pick. And we'll see how she works out. She did very, very poorly in the primaries, as you know. She was expected to do well, and she ended up at right around 2% and spent a lot of money. She had a lot of things happening, and so I was a little surprised that he picked her. I've been watching her for a long time. And
so, Naomi Lim, that's a bit of President Trump's reaction yesterday at his press conference. Yet I do see some differing perspectives from Republicans on the line of attack, that there isn't exactly one specific avenue that they've decided to take quite yet, even though this does appear to be perhaps the most predictable pick on the part of Joe Biden.
Yeah, I think I also think that the Republicans are in the same point with Joe Biden. I think they've struggled to really hone in their message against him. So I think the problem for them is that they were very much counting on a traditional campaign where you'd have Joe Biden out on the campaign trail. And as we know, for better or for worse, he says what he thinks. And often you can latch onto that and turn it into ads, or at least get some play on social media. So I think that, I think they're disadvantaged in that regard. But as I said, I'm sure there's going to be plenty of opportunity moving forward for them to sort of cling onto different things, because this ticket is not infallible.
Yeah, well, by no stretch of the imagination is either ticket infallible. That's one of the things of a political campaign you want to highlight. Just finally here, as we wrap up with you again, Naomi Lim, our guest from the Washington Examiner. I want to play cut two, because already the Trump campaign has come out with an ad attacking this ticket. I want to give folks a little bit of a taste of how the campaign already has lined up their, at least, initial blows against Kamala Harris and the campaign.
Kamala Harris ran for president by rushing to the radical left, embracing Bernie's plan for socialized medicine, calling for trillions in new taxes, attacking Joe Biden for racist policies. Voters rejected Harris. They smartly spotted a phony. But not Joe Biden. He's not that smart. Biden calls himself a transition candidate. He is handing over the reins to Kamala while they jointly embrace the radical left. Slow Joe and phony Kamala. Perfect together. Wrong for America.
Slow Joe and phony Kamala. That's the first campaign ad from the Trump campaign on this pick.
I do think that it's a smart attack line in terms of sort of saying, you know, or at least digging into why she didn't perform well in the primaries. I think there was this idea that, you know, choosing a Black woman would really help in terms of diversity, but she struggled with those demographics in the primary, particularly Black men, as people sort of uncovered her tutorial record. So I think that that's quite clever on their part to try and sort of dig into that, because I do know it's funny when you had, you know, this wide selection of females that you could choose from. Sort of questions that we were asking ourselves is, you know, why do you want to choose somebody for the ticket that didn't do or didn't sort of find favor in the Democratic Party initially? And I think that they're going to have to sort of, the Democrats are going to have to sort of wrap that around. I mean, Kamala is very charismatic. She's very telegenic, and I think she does exude warmth in this era of Zoom campaigning. And I think they're going to have to lean into that with Joe Biden's message of empathy. But I do think that it is something, it's a vulnerability for them as they sort of carve out how this is going to look like.
Yeah. Going to your point earlier, Naomi, about Kamala Harris being better when it's sort of pre-scripted as opposed to off the cuff, I think that idea of sort of being empathetic and coming across as somebody who's really caring or compassionate, that she's better at that when she is in those scripted moments as opposed to some of the unscripted exchanges that she's got. And so I think she's going to have to sort of walk that line a little bit as she gets to this position that she's never experienced before, actually being a nominee of some portion for a major political party on the national stage. It's going to be her first time being vice president nominee for the Democrats. So that will be interesting, certainly, to watch as it unfolds. But a final question here for you, Naomi Lim. Where do we go from here? What should people be watching for as this campaign unfolds, especially maybe from the messaging, as both campaigns are trying to figure out how they're going to present themselves to the American people? Now that we know what the matchup's going to be, Trump-Pence, Biden-Harris.
I think the starting point for that will be next week's Democratic convention. I sort of feel sorry for these vice presidential candidates because they have such a quick turnaround to sort of give that for most of them are going to be the most important political moment of their career when they're introducing themselves to the American public. Observers, we've been watching these people for, you know, a year and a half, sort of 2 years, as they sort of put out their feelers for different White House bids. And but for, you know, the normal average person, this is their first time sort of meeting them. And so I think that next week will definitely start the tone. I think they're still going to lean into this message of empathy because obviously they have done a lot of field testing with different Democratic voters, and that's something that sort of sings to them. But I do think that people are going to watch this Pence-Harris relationship because I feel like Pence was put on to the ticket as a moderating factor for President Trump. And so if she sort of eviscerate him at these debates, I mean, people are already sort of talking about bringing up his like Mulan op-ed and like just like comical moments like that and viral moments like that will sort of, you know, his administration coming off second best and a little bit weakened. And I thought it's something that people are sort of, you know, Democrats are looking forward to and Republicans are potentially fearing.
Yeah. Well, to your point as well about introducing Kamala Harris to the American people on this wide of a stage for the very first time, usually when it happens, it's in front of thousands and thousands of people in an arena where it is extremely loud, and that helps to boost whoever the VP is in that introduction. In those first moments, Mike Pence did have that opportunity back in 2016 with an adoring crowd. I was in the room at that point in time, actually. And Senator Harris will not, because we're in this COVID era And they're very limited on how they're going to be going about these introductory speeches from a live audience standpoint.
You're exactly right. These are going to be conventions like no other. They have to sort of balance, because these speeches are not necessarily fireside chats because you want to sort of gin up base, but it's a weird doing a virtual online. I'm trying to speak to a large crowd as opposed to sort of having those more intimate conversations. Yes. And so I think that that's going to be different for them, and potentially a disadvantage. I mean, I was talking to a lot of pollsters about, what this means in those traditional convention bounces. Are we going to see that? Because we're not going to have this sort of plethora of primetime television to look at, and the honest answer that they give me is they don't know, because this is all unprecedented, which makes it more exciting, because we don't know what's going to happen.
It will be fascinating to watch, to be sure. Naomi Lim, political reporter at the Washington Examiner. Thanks so much for joining us on this Washington Examiner Wednesday. Great to talk with you about this big news.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Once again, Naomi Lim with the Examiner, political reporter with our partners there, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads again on this Washington Examiner Wednesday. And just a couple of quick initial thoughts on the Kamala Harris pick. Number one, it is not surprising at all that Joe Biden made this selection. I was getting surprised that he was looking closely, it seemed, at Gretchen Whitmer, the horrid governor of Michigan. I was getting surprised that there was so much talk about Susan Rice, former national security advisor to President Barack Obama. I mean, there are a lot of things that were coming about that were surprising to me about Kamala Harris potentially not being the pick as opposed to being the selection by Joe Biden in this election cycle. I mean, that's something that was striking to me when they were thinking about the possibility of not going with Kamala Harris. I thought she was the most predictable and obvious choice imaginable, and it's exactly what ended up happening. Now, what the Trump campaign is going to have to highlight are the ways in which he is stronger than her on criminal justice reform. We saw the way she went toe-to-toe with Tulsi Gabbard, when Gabbard just absolutely, I would say it was, that hyperbolic, destroyed, so-and-so destroys this person. It was basically that kind of moment with a congresswoman from Hawaii really taking it to the senator from California on criminal justice issues in a way that appeals to the Democratic base. President Trump really should highlight the criminal justice reform gains that he has taken, while also underscoring no to defunding police, no to taking a lot of these extreme steps that the far left wants to see Joe Biden and other Democrats embark on. Also, when it comes to Biden and Harris, bringing them together, they do have that baggage. You cannot avoid it. Of the two of them challenging one another, and particularly Harris, surprising a lot of people at the time, a lot of analysts were struck by the manner in which Kamala Harris took these swipes at Joe Biden over comments in the 1970s related to busing. And she seemed, come across as this very empathetic person. And she showed that here in a way that was like trying to build empathy from the audience. Joe Biden, you really hurt me. You hurt me with your comments. Now she's like, that's all water under the bridge. I'm not too worried about that. That's just Joe Biden, whatever. Now we're partners. Now we're the ticket. That's just the primary. That's behind us. But Harris cannot simply avoid that. The number one problem that Kamala Harris, I think, is going to have to deal with in the Biden campaign is that moniker that the Trump campaign gave in the ad, Phony Harris. We showed that ad that the Trump campaign already has put out. Phony Harris. Slow Joe, Phony Harris. Senator Harris is known, I think in recent months and last year especially, for feigning passion pretty well, but feigning it nonetheless. That is to say, she's not authentic. She comes across as a deeply inauthentic individual when she is not scripted in these moments where she's really planned it out. Let me go ahead and touch people's hearts, pull on those heartstrings. When she's not pre-planned in that circumstance, she comes across as phony or something relative to that, something similar to phony. And I think that's going to be the challenge from the Biden campaign, is presenting Kamala Harris as somebody who could meet this moment in terms of some of the criminal justice reform issues enough to bring on board the leftist base that is honestly not too pleased about Senator Harris. They have deep reservations about her and what she brings to the table. But also at the same time, she's got to placate moderates who are looking at the Democratic Party right now and saying, I'm not too sure I'm on board with your radicalism on policing and so forth. So there's this interesting fine line that they're going to have to walk in that regard, but also in terms of authenticity, really trying to make her seem like she's not somebody who has always been looking at the next rung on the political ladder. And she's going to have to deal with these claims that she was leveling against Joe Biden. I don't know if we have pick one, Nathan Matoush, producer extraordinaire, but there was this one article that it looks like we have it. Let's put it up on the screen right now, where she did an interview with the Huffington Post. Headline, Kamala Harris on Joe Biden accusers. I believe them. Some of these things, especially in the Me Too moment, especially in the Black Lives Matter moment, some of these things that she has said in the past against Joe Biden will not easily and quickly go away. And you can bet your bottom dollar that the Trump campaign will not allow them to quickly go away. So if you're a Republican, I think you'd be pretty bullish. You should be pretty bullish about this selection of Kamala Harris, not energizing the left-wing base, but also providing some strong lines of attack and criticism from the Trump campaign. But at the same time, cannot rest on your laurels in any way, stretch, or form. You need to make sure that you're effective in your messaging and that you're not letting things slide, that you don't look at polls and see a trend that maybe President Trump is starting to regain some lost ground and say, oh, we're getting this in the bag. We don't have to worry so much. Not an election for either side, really, to underestimate the other side. So it is going to be interesting to see how this all unfolds, and also eventually when we get to a Pence-Harris debate, how that is going to look, especially since Pence is much more of a mild-mannered guy than Donald Trump. These debates are going to be quite riveting television. Must watch, to be sure. All in all, if you're a Republican, I think you'd be happy, should be happy about the selection of Kamala Harris. If you're on the far left, you're probably not so thrilled because of some of her criminal justice record and some other points. If you are a liberal Democrat, relatively progressive Democrat, you're probably pretty darn thrilled. And let us also recognize as we wrap up that this is historic and it is remarkable. She is the daughter of immigrants from Jamaica and India. And she is now going to be the Democratic Party's nominee for Vice President of the United States. That is a remarkable thing that we have in our country. Only our country can have that sort of development happen. That sort of thing can only take place in the United States of America. And Republican, Democrat, whatever, we should all be happy about it. Because it underscores something special about the United States of America. Well, that is it for us today. Thanks so much for joining us on this Washington Examiner Wednesday edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. My thanks indeed to Gordon G. Chang for his thoughts on China, to Naomi Lim from the Washington Examiner for helping to break down the selection by former Vice President Joe Biden of Kamala Harris, Senator from California, as his winner of the Veep Stakes. My thanks to Nathan Matoush, producer extraordinaire, once again working the Matoush magic. And of course, thanks to you for joining us on the program, for sharing the content, for subscribing, all those good things. Have a great day. We'll be back tomorrow. Don't miss it. And as always, may God bless America.